welcome to Easy and Powerful Segmentation Hacks with Google Analytics. This is Marty Greif with Site Tuners, and I'll be your host today. And we are very pleased to have Dave Booth with us, the founder and principal consultant for Cardinal Path. You know, when I first met Dave and learned all the things he's done, this man is absolutely unbelievable. He speaks all around the world. When I looked at just some of the speaking engagements he's had in the past year, keynoting for events in Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Norway, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, and this list keeps going on, Malaysia, the Philippines. Yeah, at some point, you wonder, you know, does he ever sleep? He's written books. He's taught master's level course on web analytics. So, you know, without any further ado, I really need to turn this over and introduce Dave Booth. Dave, take it away, my friend.
Okay. Well, thanks, Marty, and thanks for having us here. We're pretty excited to be talking about one of those things that is near and dear to my heart, which is segmentation. So hopefully everybody here is seeing a presentation entitled Leveraging Segmentation in Google Analytics, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. I think this is probably one of the most underutilized concepts in analytics today. And I think, you know, we'll go over the quick agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. Number one is just for those who aren't familiar with the idea of segmentation, we'll talk about what it is, why it's important pretty briefly, and then we'll kind of go through the mechanics of how we use Google Analytics to do this. Now, I'll also say that most of the other analytics tools that are out there, if you're on Adobe or IBM or WebTrends or any of these other technologies, there's also going to be segmentation there. We're using Google Analytics as the base of this particular webinar just because Google Analytics is so widely adopted out there, and it has some pretty neat features that we're going to use when we get into the activation of this data. We'll talk a little bit about the difference within scope when we're starting to look at segments, and then we'll talk about how we can activate some of these learnings through remarketing campaigns, and then we'll talk about how we can use segmentation with extended dimensions, so custom dimensions within Google Analytics. Again, all the other tools have their own ways of getting custom data in there, but the idea here is that there's a lot available for us in the tools themselves. There's a lot more that we probably want that's specific to our businesses that we can shove in there. And then last, we'll talk about how important segmentation can be to even squeeze out further gains in your conversion rate optimization strategies. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I said it earlier, I think this is probably one of the most underutilized concepts, and I think this is kind of partly due to the fact that web analytics is a relatively new thing. You know, we didn't have the web not that long ago, much less analytics. We were looking at hit counters, you know, inside of 10 years ago, and suddenly we've had a tremendous amount of work and of progress in this particular field. Now, the idea of segmentation within web analytics is one that not a lot of people are using, or not enough people are using. We tend to look at every single visitor to our website exactly the same way. You know, the big bucket of oranges, we treat every orange exactly the same. But the truth is, our customers are not the same. And we've been doing this in traditional marketing, you know, and this is a foundational principle of segmenting our customers and building personas and marketing to people who are in different stages of the funnel, different geographic locations, so on and so forth. So the truth is that really we should be looking at all kinds of different segments. So we should take these particular visitors and chop them up in different ways and take a look at how they may differ. Somebody who has never been to my site before versus someone who comes and is a repeat purchaser, you know, once a day is going to have a very different experience. And when I'm defining my key performance indicators and my measurement framework, I don't think it's fair for me to expect someone who's never heard of me to go out on a social media campaign and tell everyone how wonderful I am. It's a great goal for my business. It's not applicable to that particular segment. Geographic is even more straightforward. I wouldn't expect someone from California to respond to an offer that's only available in Illinois, for example. And people who are coming in on different devices. As we know, mobile and desktop experiences can be very, very different, and we want to make sure that we're optimizing for that particular segment. So with that, we're going to kind of walk into less conceptual and more how we do it. And the good news is if you've been using Google Analytics reports or any analytics reports, you have been using segmentation. you're typically looking at all of your reports with respect to these particular rows, each of which is representing a segment. So this is a simple traffic sources report within Google Analytics. We're looking at the different mediums of traffic that are bringing traffic to our website, and we're looking at in a view that's showing us a comparison to our site average with respect to a generic goal conversion rate. So very quickly, it's easy for us to see that, in this case, this particular row number 4 has a very high propensity to convert compared to others. So the CPC traffic is a different segment and should be treated differently than someone who is on my email list, for example, or someone who's coming in through social, or someone who's coming in off of a feed. And I can even see that the organic traffic here is a segment that is performing in a very different way than another segment here. So this helps us make decisions. At the business level, it helps us to understand, should we be investing more in SEO to help grow that organic presence? Should we be investing more in CPC or paid search to try and maximize this particular successful and high-performing segment of traffic? And again, this is helpful. So you're probably used to using segments within the reports. Another one that you probably commonly use here is geographic. So in this case, we're looking at a geographic report, and we're looking at the dimension of the region, which in this case is a Canadian province. Now, what's also interesting inside Google Analytics is that all of our reports are built out on these dimensions, and dimensions are any way to kind of slice and dice our data. But we can usually use 2 at a time, and that can become pretty interesting. So right here, we can certainly see there are differences between people who live in different provinces and where we're able to extract higher conversion rates from them. Of course, we'll always want to temper this with the sheer volume of conversions that we're getting. So even though Ontario may be a little worse than the site average, it's an enormous quantity of visits that are being generated here. And of course, British Columbia here, relatively similar traffic quantity, and the quality is much higher. So looking at these 2 segments, we may again make those decisions on how to treat these 2 segments. We can also use this little secondary dimension drop down at the very top, and when we do that, we can then use any of the other dimensions that Google Analytics is choosing for us or collecting for us. In this case, we could look at language. So if we were to apply that, what would actually happen is we would be refining our segment a little bit further. So now we're not looking at just a region, we're looking at the combination of a region and a language. And we can start to dig in here. So for British Columbia, which we saw was performing very, very well, we can start to see that there's a great British English version of British Columbia that's not performing quite as well. We can dig into that Quebec a little bit further and start to understand that maybe the reason that we're not performing very well in Quebec is because there's lots of French speakers, and maybe we don't have a French version of our website, or maybe our French version of our website is of a wrong flavor, wrong dialect, or it's not built out quite as much. Or maybe it is and we've just done a horrible job with it. But again, looking at this particular segment allows us to identify even further that there is a problem here with the French speakers of Quebec with respect to conversion rate on our site. And again, that helps us to take action from our businesses. So segmentation is done in the reports for you. In many cases, you can use multiple dimensions at the same time, and that's going to get you pretty far. But there's also the ability to do advanced segmentation within Google Analytics. And this is where we're going to kind of get tool specific. Again, Adobe Analytics has this. All the major platforms will have their segmentation. We're going to just follow the Google Analytics version here. So what we're able to do with the advanced segmentation is take a look at any piece of data, any particular report that we're looking at, and then apply a segment on top. So what we'll want to do in this particular case is just click on this little add segment that you'll see at the top of your screen, and what this will bring up is an interface. Now in this interface within Google Analytics, we have lots of abilities to take advantage of some of these pre-created segments that Google's already given us. So we can look at things like people who have converted or people who have come from a particular traffic source or people coming from a particular device. And a lot of these things you don't have to do anything other than just click. So if this were the case where we clicked on mobile traffic and tablet and desktop traffic, we're no longer looking at all of the visitors to our sites. We're only looking at these sessions that were from a device that was either mobile in one segment, and then we're going to look at that side by side with the other segment of people that are coming from the tablet and desktop experience. Now when we click on this apply button, we're still going to be looking at the same report. The only difference is that now we're going to actually have two side-by-side scorecards. So all the data that we're looking at in this particular report, and I've just highlighted the scorecard, will actually have the side-by-side metrics. And here we can see there's actually a very, very interesting story. People are not converting from mobile devices on this particular website. you can see that almost all of our 2 million plus in revenue here is coming from the tablet and desktop experience, and a very, very different conversion rate here. Now again, this can drive action. This can help us to understand that potentially we may want to launch a mobile app or a mobile experience or a dedicated mobile experience, or potentially redesign with responsive. Or maybe we've done that and this has been the results, in which case we have some decisions to make around what we're going to do to fix the situation, or potentially what we know about our customers and their dislike of doing e-commerce transactions on mobile devices. So again, looking at these particular reports, and again, this is just e-commerce, but this could be done for any of the different types of reports that you've got, or any of the goals that you have in the B2B space, so on and so forth. We can see very, very big differences between different segments of traffic. So at this point, we've kind of covered the basic segmentation that you'll get in the rows of the reports that you're looking at, the ability to add second dimensions to those to be able to look at more specific segments, and even the ability to apply some of the pre-configured segments to any of the reports that you're looking at. And that's kind of where the basics end. And where we want to go from here is the ability to create your own segments. So as you're looking at your data, as you're slicing and dicing things and starting to investigate and understand who the most profitable or the best performing segments of traffic are, you're probably going to exhaust the list of pre-configured ones pretty quickly. And the good news is that you have additional opportunities within this particular interface to create new segments. And that's done in the same interface here. We just click on the big red button that says plus new segment. And when we add this, you're going to be looking at an interface that's really interesting. You can give each of these segments a name. You're going to save these segments so that you can continue to apply them to all of your reports in the future. And then you can start to add these different conditions that will define this particular segment. And this is literally only bounded by your own creativity and curiosity. You have the ability to do all kinds of different slices and dices of particular audience segments that you want to look at, and you get to do it at different levels that we'll talk about in just another minute. So in this case, you can see that we've defined this highly engaged visitor as someone who's come to the site, and during their visit or during their session, they've looked at more than 3 pages and they've stayed on there for more than 2 minutes. Now that's just kind of arbitrary. You can certainly set this to whatever makes sense for your business, but I also want to point out that you have the ability to do different match type and match criteria. You have the ability to include or exclude each of these conditions, and you have the ability to add multiple and or statements here. So in this case, it's not someone who has stayed for 3 pages and has stayed for more than 2 minutes. Either one of those criteria will work in this particular or section. So when we've created this, we save this segment, and similarly to what we just saw, rather than looking at mobile versus desktop, we would be looking at all of our traffic versus, in this particular case, what we've called highly engaged visitors. And we can start to see how conversion rates change, how different things are working for and against us with each of these. So let's take a look at some of the other ones that we can do. Now, across the left-hand side here, you see lots of different ways that we're able to cut up our visitors. So we can do it by demographics. So for those of you on classic analytics who are using a DC.js or Universal Analytics who are using the DoubleClick and Google Display Network data, you have the ability to look at your visitors through things like age and gender. And of course, we can start to look at the languages. We can start to look at segments that they are considered to be in market for. And we can also do geo-targeting. So in this case, we're looking at location. And what we've done here is we've added this criteria where the location of a region, in this case the United States region corresponds to state, contains Texas. So what we're looking at when we apply this or save this segment would be only people who are coming from Texas. Similarly, we could do some things on the technology side. So if we were to look at this technology groupings, we see additional things like operating systems or browsers or the type of device that they're on, or whether it's mobile or not. And again, you can scroll down and investigate this even further. There's lots and lots and lots of options for you. So in this case, what we've done is we've gone after people who are on the Chrome browser. You could certainly go after someone who is on a iOS operating system to isolate iPhone users or iPad users, for example. And those can be very, very useful segments as well to even drill down on that predefined mobile segment, we could say, specifically the device they're coming to or anything that may be important to our business. Now, the other thing that I want to call out is that you can combine these, of course, and over here on the right, you'll see that there's a little summary at all times that will show you what your particular segment that you're building has as part of its criteria. In this case, you can see we've got a little 1 in both the demographics and the technology category. So if we were to add both the users from Texas and Chrome users criteria, we would end up with a segment called Chrome users from Texas. And of course, if we wanted to get rid of those from a UI perspective, we can just X those things out and eventually get this to where we want it to be to go ahead, click Save, and save our segment and start using it. So just looking at some of the other ones that we have, we won't go through them all, but you have the ability to look at the behavior. So if they're performing certain events or visiting certain pages, if they're converting on certain goals or not converting on certain goals, we can start to see how far back their particular first session was. We can look at where they're coming from with respect to our marketing campaign. So if we've used tagging, we can start to see, are these AdWords visitors or Bing Ads visitors? We can compare those against each other. And of course, on the e-commerce side, we have all of the traditional e-commerce metrics, and now with enhanced e-commerce, we have even more. So lots and lots of things going on here. And of course, if none of those things are exactly what you're after, you have these advanced abilities to just identify whatever conditions and sequences you want. And we'll come back to that here in just a little bit as well. So the segmentation interface is actually pretty straightforward. The best way to start using it is to dive in and start playing with it, and it becomes very intuitive. And then you can start to preview and test these things to start to look at the traffic and really investigate and dive deeper into your data to understand who are these particular interesting segments for you. So one other thing we want to chat about as we start to build out these segments is that there are different scopes of the segments themselves. In particular, I want to talk about both the session and the user level segments. So a session you can think of as a visit. In Google Analytics, a visit is defined as ending after 30 minutes of inactivity, a stroke of midnight, or the closing of a browser. And if you were to come back again, that would be a different visit or a different session. And you may choose to create these segments and look at them in the scope of a session. You may also choose to use these in the scope that spans multiple sessions, and that would be at the user level. So in this particular case, what I want to show is the difference between looking at a medium of social. So what we're looking at here is people who have come in off of a medium of social. And you can see what I've got here is that I'm doing this at the session level, which means that when I apply this filter, Google Analytics will only include data from visits or sessions where the direct source of that session contains the word social. And again, this is something you could see in your straightforward reports. So if you were to go in here and leave this at the session level, you would see in your reports, if you went back to that traffic sources reports, a list that has been stripped of everything except things that had social in them. So we're not case sensitive here. We've got capital S, lowercase s. We've also got social of social media, depending on the tagging that was being done. But we have only data from these social sessions. Now this may be very, very useful for you if you are a social media manager and you manage large Twitter, Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn campaigns, and you have all of these coming in off of a standard medium of social, and you want to see exactly what you are generating in the direct response to the campaigns that you're running. In that case, this would be a perfect scope for this particular segment to look at the session level. But you might also choose to do that exact same segment, only this time set it to user instead. And if you set it to user, what Google Analytics is going to do is it's going to stop looking at just the sessions, and it's going to start looking at any of the users who at any point across any of their sessions have come in off of a social channel. Now this is going to be a really interesting segment for you to use, because it's going to start to identify what other sorts of sources or mediums of traffic people are using if the criteria is met that at some point in their history of visiting your site they have responded to a social campaign. So in this particular case, we can see that a lot of these folks are coming back on a direct channel. So this none is typically what Google refers to as we have no idea where the from, so we'll attribute it either to a direct entry or a bookmarking of the site or something like that. We can also see that people are coming off of the referrals, and in this particular segment we can start to use additional reports within Google Analytics to understand the different touch points that lead people towards a conversion or a lack of a conversion, and start to understand why. So the difference between sessions and users when we're setting this up is really, really important. And I'll give you just a couple of other examples here that start to become pretty interesting. If we were to look at a geo segment by session, of course we would only be looking at those segments that are generated when that particular user is located in that particular region. Another interesting thing that we've seen working with some of our clients is, a lot of times people move around. So if you have potentially a B2B sale where you're at a C-level sort of sell, you may want to understand, well, someone may be based in New York and visit there a lot, but where else are they? They may be traveling through airline hubs like Chicago and Houston, and this may drive decisions around potentially where you'd like to target particular CPC campaigns or additional marketing or even offline marketing. Maybe you do want to plaster that airport with your outdoor and things of that nature. And again, you can start to see that people do move. They are mobile from city to city. So looking at this at the user level can often be extremely insightful versus just limiting it to a session level of a particular geography. Another place this becomes really interesting is in the products and services that you sell. This can be a fantastic way to identify cross-sells and even upsells. So in this case, what we've done is we've created a segment around users who have at some point in their history purchased a turkey sandwich. And we can see that those folks also tend to like ham and chicken salad and so on and so forth. A lot of them have kids that they're getting the peanut butter and jelly. Again, this is a kind of fictitious data, but you can get the idea that using these particular segments at the user level can have a whole new set of possibilities. So again, throughout this webinar, we're going to try and make the best use of your 1 hour and provide as many examples as we can. But I do want to just reiterate that when you are finished up and get the thank you note for attending this one, you do have the download links for a handful of PDFs. One of those PDFs will actually go through lots of these useful segments that lots of different businesses tend to gain a lot of advantage from. So that's looking at sessions versus users, and again, it's an important nuance for us to understand as we use this particular tool. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about here is how we can use these particular segments with some real examples. So again, we'll have that PDF, but I just want to talk about a few. And this is a really interesting one. So what you're looking at here is a segment called Purchased a Big Ticket Item. And here what we've done is we've looked at revenue, and we've limited this to the per session area. So we want to look at this per session, and this particular session constraint will tell us that we've got someone who has purchased at least a $500 cart, or potentially a $500 item if we were to change our metric there. This can be interesting, and this could be a segment of people that we want to look at who we know are going to buy something that they're not averse to putting $500 and clicking the checkout button. If we were to change this to per user, this would be a very different segment. This would then turn into more of a customer lifetime value segment. So we don't care if they've gotten to the $500 per user threshold by 500 different transactions of $1 each. This is a customer who is worth at least $500 in past purchases to us. And that's another interesting segment for us to investigate and start to understand which of the marketing campaigns they respond to, which ones do they not, where do they tend to play around on the site, where do they not, what can we do with content optimization, media mix allocation, all of these different things can be answered very differently just by changing this particular setting. And again, revenue doesn't have to come from an e-commerce implementation. You may be assigning revenues for goals, for example, the filling out of a contact form or a quote request or the download of a white paper, or any of those sorts of things can also feed these. So it's not just e-commerce. Another one that's interested here, we're looking at people who downloaded a PDF. And I don't really care when. All I care is that in this case we've used event tracking to track the download of something in a PDF format. So using this particular set of conditions will help me to create this segment, and I can understand, do people who actually download this PDF eventually come back and convert? Do they buy something from me, or do they submit a contact form? Do they sign up for additional webinars? What do they do? And again, this is a really interesting way to start to segment your users and see what it is that they're responding to and what they're not, and adjust your plans. Another one that's fairly interesting here is somebody who has been engaged but not recently. So in this case, we're keeping this at the user level, and we're looking at people who have been to our site at least 3 times, but not for at least a week. And this may be a group of people that we would absolutely want to take action on. We may want to send them a re-engagement email. We may want to target them with a remarketing or retargeting campaign to say, well, what's going on? Come back to us. We've missed you. All those sorts of things that I'm sure you get in your inboxes as well. But sending that to everyone is certainly not something you want to do. You want to treat this particular segment of users in a particular way. And this is a great way to set this up. So that's kind of where we go with creating these segments. And again, sky's the limit. We've only got an hour today to talk about this, but hopefully between some of these examples, it's gotten your imagination going a little bit, and that PDF you can download will give you even more examples. Lots of different ways to slice and dice your data. And then we get to the place where we've been for a long, long time, which is, well, that's fantastic. I found a very unique segment that I really want to do something interesting with, but I can't. I've never been able to action these segments. It's really, really hard in a realm where personally identifiable information, or PII, is typically disallowed in analytics tools to take a segment and then action it. I have to go back and connect that somehow with either a back-end CRM system or an ERP system or a customer management system, and then try to replicate that segment as best I can. But it's always been very hard to action those segments. One thing that we really like about the Google Analytics tool is that obviously Google owns the analytics tool as well as a pretty popular paid search platform, Google AdWords. And on this side, we have the ability to action these lists directly, which is to say if we find an interesting segment, so in this case, if we find that these people who have purchased a big ticket item are very interesting to us, we have always had a hard time potentially creating a display campaign or a search campaign around people who fit this bill. Now we can actually create an AdWords remarketing list literally by dropping this down and clicking on the remarket button. Now when we do this, what it's going to do is automatically export this list into your AdWords account so that all of these cookie IDs that are being identified within this analytics criteria are then going to be signed up for your AdWords remarketing list. And of course, remarketing allows people to continue to sign up if they continue to match this criteria, and then you can send a very specific message to these folks and chase them around the internet until they do what it is you want them to do through the remarketing tactics. So what happens here is if I wanted to actually, if I found that these people who purchased a big ticket item were very, very important to me, and I've done my research, I've looked at the data, I've done my analysis, and I said, you know what, I find that people who buy a $500 big screen TV or people who buy a very expensive item are likely to come back within 3 months and buy something else to go with it. I could actually use a time delay on this. I could start to build out this campaign to give them exactly what I know they want to just the people that I know want it. So when I click on Remarket, it will take me to a interesting screen inside the Google Analytics administrative panel. So you do have to be an administrator here. You do have to have your AdWords and Analytics accounts linked. But in this case, we've got a fictitious view of my taco stand here. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this data from my taco stand and the segment that I've created in my taco stand's Analytics account, and I'm going to create a AdWords remarketing list from it. Now, one thing that we want to take a look at here is that because we're looking at historical data, we do have the ability to use a look-back window, which means that I can create my list today, and I could have 7, 14, or even a month's worth of people automatically signed up for that list, which means I can action that starting today. I don't have to wait until my list gets to a certain size from the time I define that list going forward. So in this particular case, if I've created this list of people who have bought $500 in tacos from me, I may say that people who have done this are only interesting to me after the last week. Otherwise, they're going to get sick from all these tacos. Or if you think about business travel, for example, people who are looking into business travel but not yet purchasing tend to do it pretty quickly, versus vacation planning on the family side tends to take a little bit longer. So you have the ability to change this look-back window and, of course, set your expiration time on this particular list in the next screen. So when we've done this, the next thing we do is just give it a name. This is the name that AdWords is going to take, and that when you log into your AdWords account, you're going to see it. You give it the membership duration, which we've just talked about. May make sense to be 30 days. It may make sense to be 1 day. And AdWords lets you go up to 540 days, which is to say that you could actually chase someone around the internet for 1.5 years to get them to buy whatever it is that you're selling here. And that may make sense if you're doing time delays, campaigns, and things of that nature. You can get an estimate for the size of your list right here just by clicking this button, and then all you're left with is to choose which AdWords account that is, of course, linked to your Analytics account that you'd like to export this list to. And once you've done that, you click Save Remarketing List, and now you're ready to go. You'll log into AdWords, and you'll be able to use that remarketing list, build your creatives, start to add additional targeting if you have additional segmentation or limitations that you want to put on it. Go ahead and click the button and start advertising. So this is a tremendously powerful way to action the data that we found in analytics, and I think this is a big deal for the analytics industry to be able to take the analysis and very quickly in a very seamless way go ahead and click a button and then action that, that particular intelligence that you've just found to help drive your business goals. So I don't want to understate that, but at the same time, the focus of this is not setting up a remarketing campaign. One of those PDFs that you'll have access to download will actually go through the steps of setting up campaigns and remarketing lists step by step. So you can feel free to download that and follow those instructions to go ahead and create a remarketing list and take advantage of this feature. So when you're doing that, a couple more that we think are pretty useful that you can build right out of analytics. Again, knowing that we have the ability to scope at the user or the session level, here's one where we're actually creating an abandoned cart segment. So this is people who have added something to their cart, but I've not gotten their money yet. And by using this particular segment, I'll be able to create a remarketing campaign that maybe offers a 10% off coupon, or says, you know, we noticed you didn't check out. What can we do to make that better? Come check out our fall sale, whatever that happens to be. Again, you know, AdWords offers things like dynamic remarketing. There's other retargeting platforms out there who have been doing this for many years, and this has been a particularly useful segment and high-performing segment of people who you know have gotten fairly far down the purchase path to the point where they put something in their cart, but they've not yet pulled the trigger on it. Great segment for you to work with. Here's another interesting one in the non-e-commerce space, but in the B2B space, or if you're looking to get a quote request or a client request, you can certainly use your page-based filters. So in this case, we're looking at people who have gone to the quote request page, but they haven't completed it, so they haven't pulled the trigger again. We know they're interested enough to think about it. We just know that they haven't actually pulled the trigger. And we may create a campaign that we would go after these folks and say, hey, can we provide any more information? Can we drip some white papers or additional information to you? Can we invite you to something? Can we give you some gifts along the way to hopefully move you down that path to purchase or a path to conversion in this particular case? So lots of abandonment segments tend to be very successful for you, both in the e-commerce and in the B2B space. Some other ones, again, we've talked about upselling and cross-selling. You know, here's an example. We know somebody purchased the chips, but we know that they didn't buy the salsa yet, and we know those two tend to go together. We've looked at our transaction affinities, we've run some data modeling, and we've figured out that, you know, people who buy chips have a high propensity to purchase salsa. Well, we can create this list, and then we can start to advertise salsa, you know, directly by clicking that remarket list. Remarket button, we can export this list out to AdWords and create a campaign all around upselling salsa to the chips buyers. You know, of course, this could be in any category. The other example we have here would just be people who buy running shoes tend to follow it up with additional running supplies. You know, but of course, your business is your business, and you'll know these things much better than I will. But hopefully, this gets your again imagination flowing about the sorts of segments that you can create and then immediately action through this very unique integration between AdWords and analytics. Another one that's interesting. People who are showing a lot of interest but not doing a lot of converting activity. So this is a very good group for us to target. In many cases, this is exactly the group we want to target. It's people that we know have a demonstrated interest, but we don't yet have their money, don't yet have their interest, don't yet have that next step, whatever that next step is. So here, very quickly, we're using a user-based filter of people who have been to our site at least 5 times but still haven't completed our goal, whatever that goal happens to be. Maybe, you know, signing up to follow us on social media, maybe signing up for a webinar, contacting us, getting a quote, whatever that happens to be for your business. Down here in the bottom right, we've got one where we're looking at people who stayed on our site for a long time. They were there for more than 5 minutes. They looked at more than 10 pages, or at least 10 pages, and they still didn't pull the trigger. So this might be a group that we want to go after and say, hey, what's going on? You clearly have some interest. What can we do to take you to that next step? So again, lots and lots of useful segments that can be just immediately actioned there. And it doesn't stop with just the pieces of data that Google Analytics collects by default, or that can be configured through some of its more traditional e-commerce or goal tracking features. With Universal Analytics, we have the ability to push in just about any piece of data that we want. And I don't want to take away from Google Analytics or any of the analytics tools out there and the array of information that they're bringing in. These are just a couple of screenshots here of some of the dimensions that Google Analytics will track by default, or that you can configure very simply and easily with event tracking, with goal configurations, with e-commerce, and now enhanced e-commerce, with the integrations between the paid search tool, AdWords, and analytics. You get all kinds of wonderful data that you can start to segment on. And any of these are fair game for building your custom segments. But at some point, there's going to be some data that you're going to want that Google Analytics isn't able to track natively and has no idea that you want to track it. So let's start to think about some of these. You may be in a B2B space, and you may be very, very interested in using a third-party tool that helps you identify what industry a particular visitor is in. Not their name, not their email address, or who they are, but just the fact that maybe you're in finance and you want institutional investors to come to your website, and you know which companies these are, right? Or maybe you're in a particular B2B space where you know that you only work with 100 companies, and you know who all of them are. So when they're on your site, you want to know about them, and you want to be able to take a look at those industry by industry. Well, Google Analytics doesn't request or report on that data. You would need to push that data into Google Analytics, and we'll talk about how we do that here in just a second. But there's lots of other ways that you can start to pull additional data that's not collected by default inside Google Analytics. So you think of just someone who's logged in or not logged in. That may be a very interesting segment for you to take a look at. Gender that you actually know from your database. You may be able to push that back from your CRM from logged in users and then start to look at a segment of male versus female. Or of course age and other demographics fit into this category. Or maybe you're an airline and you want to look at people who are part of your different membership categories. Gold versus silver versus diamond versus platinum, or people who are on the freemium version versus the full paid version versus some hybrid, or people who are long lifetime value customers, or people who are relatively new customers. Whatever you want and whatever makes sense to your business, you can shove in there, with one exception. And just as a quick warning here, anything that you put in that's considered PII or personally identifiable information is a breach of terms. So you can't put somebody's email address in there, you can't put their credit card number, their driver's license number, or anything that can identify a single user. So again, most of us in the analysis space would argue that we really don't care what John Smith did. We're much more interested in what a segment that represents 1,000 users like John Smith did, so that we can then take action on that particular segment. So this is going to be okay for 99.9% of us out there. But just as a quick warning, we want to avoid the PII. So lots of different things that we can shove in with custom dimensions, and the implementation of this is actually fairly straightforward as well. I'm going to use the Universal Analytics version of this, which is the newer and going forward version of Google Analytics that has 2 steps to defining a custom dimension. The first one is that as an administrator to the account, you'll go in and you'll go to the custom dimensions area. You will click on this plus red button that says plus new custom dimension, and you're going to define it inside the Google Analytics interface. Now that's step 1. So the first step is you have to define it, and then the second step is you're going to have to add some code or go through a Google Tag Manager or another tag management solution that's out there to push all that great data back to Google Analytics. So the first step anybody can do, it's pretty easy. The technical side we'll talk about here in just a minute. So once we create a new custom dimension, we also have this idea of scope. And again, this is pretty important for us to understand. We've already talked about differences between sessions and users, but just to give you a couple examples, and again, one of those PDFs that we'll make available to you for download will have all this information, all these instructions on how to do this as well. So no need to take furious notes right here. But a user level custom dimension would be something that is attached to that user across multiple sessions and multiple hits being sent back to Google Analytics. So if we had a customer type, for example, I wanted to segment between my gold, silver, platinum, and diamond members, this would be something that I don't expect to change from visit to visit. They may move between those classes from time to time, year to year, but I can always update that. I want that particular attribute, that particular dimension, to be tied to the actual user. There are other things that I might want to create around the session. So think about you want to create a segment around logged in sessions versus logged out sessions. That would be something that does change from visit to visit, and that would be a much more appropriate one for the session level. At the hit level, this would be something that you could think of as tied to a particular page. So let's pretend you're a content publishing site, and although you definitely know which are the highest pages that are being viewed the most and interacted with the most, you may also want to attribute additional information to that page level hit, like who was the author of that particular piece of content, or what category did it reside in. All those things can be done at the hit level. And then at the product level, of course, you can add as many product attributes that you want to augment the implementation of the enhanced e-commerce. So you'll get the SKU number, and you'll get the product name and the category. Of course, those are the default things. But maybe you want to add things like the size or the color. Or you may want to do whether it's in stock or out of stock sorts of statuses of those products. Again, the sky is the limit here, and you're able to define any of these custom dimensions at your own discretion. But again, scope is important. So that's step one. Give it a name, give it a scope. For those of you that would move on to step two on the technical side, there's a couple of different ways to do it. Again, a little bit beyond what we want to do in this particular webinar is to go through the code. So I just want to make mention that this can be done for Universal Analytics, and it can be done on web, mobile web. It can be done on apps on the Android and iOS side, and it can also be done through all the major tag management solutions that are out there, including Google Tag Manager, which many implementations use for Google Analytics. Again, this little link down here has all the details for how to put this code in play, and of course we'll be sending out that PDF that has the step-by-step instructions as well. But once we've done that, that's where it starts to get interesting, because now we can actually use these dimensions as we define any of our segments. So if we go back to that segment interface, you can see here that customer type that we just defined. This is not one that's native to Google Analytics. We had to define it and we had to tell it, and suddenly we're looking at a particular segment of people who are in our silver category. This could be tremendously valuable for us. We can start to find that, you know, people who make it up to the gold level end up spending 5 times as much. So we could, again, click our little button, click remarket, and create an entire campaign that's only there to get people from silver to upgrade to gold. Maybe that's through a free upgrade, or maybe it's through a partner program, or however those things are happening. But we are now targeting the exact recipient of this message to get a result that we know that we've seen in the analysis is going to help our business. You know, you can start to look at other sorts of lead targeting based on, you know, specific things that people are coming to your site. Have they ever logged in or not? Do they have a customer account or don't they? You wouldn't want to send become a customer of ours to someone who is already a customer of yours. We've all seen those remarketing list fails where you've bought something and then you start getting ads for that same thing now with a 10% off coupon, and you feel like you just paid 10% too much. So this can help to limit those sorts of things. But there's lots of different reasons that we can use custom dimensions, and then tremendous amounts of segmentation that we can do on these. We can also combine those with the traditional metrics and dimensions that we've got. So in this case, we're looking at people who have come from a financial services industry, and this is a custom dimension that we've defined that we're pushing into Google Analytics, and we've also known that they have some interest, but they haven't submitted the quote yet. So we can start to, you know, refine some of those other segments that we talked about earlier with additional custom data that we're able to push into the tool. So a tremendous amount of opportunity here for you when you're looking at the custom segmentation and custom dimensions. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here before we open things up for Q&A and kind of a recap here is how segmentation can be important for conversion rate optimization. So obviously this is a Site Tuners webinar. Tim and team at Site Tuners have been doing a phenomenal job of this for many, many years, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on segmentation for CRO. So this is an example of a test that was run in a testing tool, not Google's testing tool, but as many of you know who are running tests, you can export a lot of the data into custom dimensions into Google Analytics. So in this case, what we've done is we've done a simple A/B test, and we have pushed as a custom dimension whether or not people have seen version A or version B. Now the tool itself is going to have its own reporting, and it will tell us in its own terms and with its own statistical analysis and whatnot who our winner was. And in this case, you know, you can see that we've got a version B had a higher conversion rate than version A. We'll assume that that was statistically significant and that everything turned green in our tool of choice, and we have found that, you know, version B is our winner. We can see that may make a significant impact to our revenue, and that could have been a very, very successful test. And don't get me wrong, this was a very successful test. We found something that resonated with our users. The only problem here is that as we started out, we're looking at this big box of oranges all the same, and we're saying that all of our users are the same, and all of them prefer version B over version A. Now, one thing you have to remember is that when we're looking at unsegmented or aggregated data, we're looking at averages. And one of the things I love to say is that, you know, on average, Ted Turner and I each own 1 million acres of land, which is true, absolutely true. It is perfectly true. However, it is not representative of either me or Ted Turner, which would be the two objects in question here. So by looking at averages, you may actually be doing a disservice by focusing on something that is relevant to a very small percentage of your traffic. And if we start to look at our different segments, what you might find and what you often find is that different segments tend to prefer different things. So in this particular case, while we may get ourselves a conversion rate increase, and in this case we certainly will by moving on and saying we've run a very, very successful holistic A/B test, we could segment this a little further. And what we're looking at here is just the application of a mobile versus tablet and desktop custom segment inside Google Analytics. And again, this is the same exact one that we saw earlier in this webinar. And we can see that for tablet and desktop traffic, it is absolutely true here that they do prefer version B. We can see that they have a higher average order value, and we can see that that conversion rate is indeed higher. But if we take a look at our mobile traffic, we see that just the opposite is true. And there's actually a larger difference, raw difference between the observed conversion rate here, where mobile visitors tend to like version A better. Now, this is very interesting for us to look at. And of course, we could segment by anything. We're just looking at a particular device, but you could certainly segment this towards the type of visitor, people who are active customers, not active customers, people who are of a certain status within your particular loyalty programs, any of those things that we've looked at here. And of course, the real value here is that in today's world, we don't have to pick a particular a recipe or a particular version to show everyone. We can do some personalization. So while we know that the general public, if we looked at everybody overall holistically as one big bucket of oranges, they like version B, we know that there's a segment out there, at least one segment, that likes version A better. So we could potentially start to personalize. We could use version B for people that are coming on tablet and desktops, and then we could start to use version A in our mobile designs. So maybe we have an M.dot separate site, maybe we have a responsive site, or we have some control over how to have that user experience differ. Of course, this could be done in any way. So with the personalization tools that are out there, you know, you could think of populating an inbox or populating any sorts of content components that actually is driven by particular segments that tend to perform very differently with respect to what they will respond to. Now, what's really interesting here is obviously we can take a look at just what this might do in this particular example. So we've got, you know, in this particular case, we're splitting our traffic between version A and version B, and had we done just our version B to everyone, we would have gotten a healthy increase, right? 36 cents revenue per session increase, which is fairly substantial. And that's a good thing. So again, I don't want to take away from folks that are doing conversion rate optimization and not using segmentation, but I do want to point out that if you actually implemented the results of this test and then started to personalize, so just that small segment of mobile traffic that you wanted to show version A to, you would actually get an extra 13-cent bump on top of that revenue per session gain that you just got. Now, to put that in additional terms, you know, with these particular numbers, that ends up being an extra $47,000 for this particular situation. But you know, in relative terms, that's over a 25% improvement that we're leaving on the table because we didn't segment our results on a very simple device-level segmentation. So again, I encourage you to, at any time you're doing some testing, make sure that you are putting those test variations as custom dimensions or whatever analytics tool you're using, record what versions people are seeing. And then you can start to do, again, all kinds of additional analysis from a statistical standpoint, but you can also slice, dice, chop up, and segment. So with that, you know, just to recap real quickly what we've run through today in our session is, you know, segmentation can be extremely powerful. We don't want to treat all of our visitors the same, and we don't have to. Today's tools allow us to do all kinds of segmentation. When we're looking at analytics reports, we're typically looking at segmented rows to start with. We can always adjust that even further by applying segments, both the predefined and the custom ones that we can define. We can also make that even more powerful by using custom dimensions inside analytics, and then we can make all this actionable by creating campaigns to run to present a particular message to a particular segment that can drive significant business value. And then, of course, on the testing side, using segments and looking at the results within the context of segments can really help us to drive even more results out of the tests that we're running. So with that, Marty, I'm going to hand it back to you, and then we should have a few minutes left over for some questions here before we wrap up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dave. I'm looking at some of the questions that are already coming back here, and you're getting amazing reviews here, so very well done. While we talk about a special offer that Cardinal Path has for you, let me ask all the attendees, if you have questions, and I see people are already starting to do that, feel free to add in more questions. And what I will do is I will try to kind of group similar questions together so I can ask Dave. We have about 8 or 9 minutes to do questions. So while you type questions, let me just tell you about this offer. Cardinal Path is offered for the attendees here to get 10% off of their courses. And then if you've loved what Dave has done here, you will absolutely be thrilled with the training that his organization offers. And you'll notice up in the top right-hand corner of the slide, we talk about 10% off of all of their courses using the promo code SiteTuner Special. Now that offer does expire November 10th, so I would encourage you to go to training.cardinalpath.com and look at where their trainings are being held, and if there's one near you, although this is worth traveling to, you would certainly want to jump on that. For those of you who are also interested in the conversion side of this, if you're already doing segmentation or you've got some idea of user intent, if you reach out to us, we would be more than happy to do a 15-minute review. Now, we do say to you that we ask that you have at least $1 million annually, because if you don't have a volume, that's a way of looking at volume, then the segmentation, some of this won't really necessarily apply to you. So if you're over $1 million in revenue and you would like us to do a review of your site, a mini review, to talk about what we see from the conversion rate optimization perspective, we'd be more than happy to do that. So with that thought in mind, let's go to questions here. And again, Dave, I'm telling you, we are getting amazing responses back here on your presentation. So I mean, very well done. Let me see if I can, if we can talk about a couple questions here. People have been asking, and I'm going to put multiple people into one question here. People have asked for remarketing. Can you extract the remarketing lists and export them to other third parties, as opposed to just doing it into AdWords?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from what I've shown you here on the Google stack, we're looking at Google Analytics that exports directly into Google AdWords, which again gives you access to the Google Display Network or GDN inventory. For those of you on Google Analytics Premium, you can amp that up to DoubleClick as well, which of course gets you tremendous coverage. I think they're saying that's about 8 out of every 10 people on planet Earth can be touched by the larger Google networks, including DoubleClick. But again, you know, this is specific to Google Analytics. There are many other platforms out there. So of course on the Adobe stack, you have the ability to do these same segmentation techniques, and then just through a little bit different on the mechanics side, you can certainly buy media sharing lists across these. You may also have data management platforms that you may be using internally. All those things can help to make these even more actionable, get you even more reach out of them.
Thank you, Dave. We had another question here from some folks, and I'm going to combine a couple that maybe I'm not doing this correctly. We've had questions about within standard segments, the examples are 2 conditions within a segment, and can Google Analytics handle more than that? And then the next kind of follow-on is obviously in custom dimensions you can do more, but what are the limits there? So I kind of combine multiple questions from multiple people into one.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it comes down to limits in general, and there's kind of 2 sides to that. You can look at 4 segments side by side within the interface, and it doesn't matter how you've created those segments. You could have, 5, 10 different criteria in each of those segments. That's irrelevant. You can apply 4 segments to look at side by side. So in that scorecard example where we looked at mobile versus desktop, you could have also looked at that versus iPhone versus Android on top of that and seen 4 side by side. Inside the criteria limits, really this is one where you're probably not going to have to worry about hitting limits. You can put and or statements until you get sick and tired of them. I'm sure there is a technical limitation, and I can certainly get back to the group on what that happens to be, but don't consider yourself handcuffed by any means on that. We've seen some pretty interesting and pretty specific segments being built with this newer interface that's been launched fairly recently.
I muted myself. Sorry, everyone. I'm talking and I'm asking the next question, and that didn't really work very well. I think we'll ask this. People have asked about, we've had a number of people, well, you can't have identifiable information. Would IP addresses be considered one of the, as I think someone said, poison things to put in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, different tools have their own interpretations of what actually establishes or is PII. There are certifications you can get in this particular field. Of course, we're watching this play out in the European markets especially. It's a big debate, right? It's something that we're going to have to solve as an industry, and it goes wider than just analytics. Of course, this is for the broader advertising industry to understand, how private is private and what's help versus hindrance. But I think in the Google Analytics space, it does collect IP address, but it's not a metric that you can report back on. It uses IP address primarily for the geo-targeting, among other signals, to figure out where the particular user is from. But again, lots of folks will choose to filter based on IP addresses in order to filter out traffic from your internal office and things like that. You can do that, but you're going to have a hard time extracting IP address. Now, different tools will give you different levels of access for that. The other thing I'll say is that a unique user ID is not PII. So according to the terms of service for Google Analytics and many other tools, you are actually allowed in many cases to put a unique identifier. In fact, Universal Analytics offers this as a feature. You can create a UID, and it has to, of course, follow certain standards, but then you can use that to stitch together visits from a single user across. Google Analytics Premium users are often then taking this into a back-end, a larger data store, or doing some work with BigQuery or some ETL to then join those things back so that in their protected environments and their protected systems, they're able to actually take a look at specific types of users and just not keep the PII in the data collection tool. That's a lot, but hopefully helpful.
No, that's good. And just a follow-up on that, is Google Analytics able to identify multiple users if they're coming from the same IP address?
So typically, the IP address wouldn't identify one user. That could be many people in a different floors of the same building, so on and so forth. You can look at things like the ISP. That's typically a good way to group visitors for ISPs that have been purchased for a corporate. In fact, a lot of B2B clients will identify, that this company was on our website. I don't know who it was, but I know it was someone in that group. People from company XYZ, and that may be a trigger to reach out to them or something like that. There's, again, lots of other tools out there that will help identify traffic and figure out, to whatever level they're able, who it was that was on your site. So a lot of these are focused in the B2B space specifically, and then, of course, that data can be pushed in as custom dimensions inside Google Analytics.
Dave, we're at the top of the hour. Do you have time for one last question? I'm looking at all these good questions, and there's one that seems to jump out from a bunch of folks.
Absolutely.
It basically has to do with sampling size and segmentation. Do you have a rule of thumb for how to evaluate, sample size, time, or length of a test, and so on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really comes down to design of experiments. What you want to understand here is, sample size is going to vary. If we knew what the sample size was before we started the test, we wouldn't have to test because we already know what the answer is going to be. But there's some things that make a big difference. The first thing is, obviously how many people are coming to your site. That's going to be a big one. You want to make sure, you have your threshold of a million in size just to make sure you're getting some good data to work with. There are samples that you'll have to hit thresholds with. The other thing people tend to forget about sometimes is how many variations are you testing. So if you're testing 4 variations versus 2, all other things held equal, I would need a lot more people to come to my site before I get a clear winner if I have more variations that I'm testing, because I'm splitting people into more buckets. The other thing that people start to think about is, the difference between the test results. So if I've got an A/B test and they actually perform exactly the same, so I may be running an A/B test with the exact same content. So theoretically, this is a test that would never end. I would never have a large enough sample to prove that one is better than the other. Whereas if I had one that was performing 5 times better than the other, it takes me a lot less data to prove that that difference is statistically significant. So again, lots and lots of different things that can go into sample size estimations. We have a tool on our website that will help you to estimate a sample size or show you a big chart what your potential sample sizes could be, given the conversion rates, the difference between the variations, and so on and so forth. And there's many other tools out there as well. But over on www.cardinalpath.com in our tools section, you can certainly find the sample size estimator that can hopefully give you a good starting point.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you very much for this wonderful, I'm going to call this a training. I mean, that's what this felt like. I learned a ton. Any last comments?
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's been a pleasure, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully this has been a valuable hour in your Wednesday. So thanks everyone.